All right, ready?
Just a sec, I'll introduce you to the audience and then we'll go ahead. So, guys, it's wonderful to see you all on a Sunday morning, such an August gathering. Basically, when you kick off your startup venture, you must realize that you need the required mentoring, need the required connections, the capital, and that sort of recognition that can get you out in the market. And that's where startup accelerators come into the picture. So when you go for a startup accelerators, which are also known as seed accelerators, they are they are a fixed term cohort program that can help you, and they'll provide you with the mentorship that you need, and they'll provide you with certain assets that can help you scale your business. Today we have KAT MANALAC with us, and she is from YCombinator, which is one of the world's largest and most famous seed accelerators. So she is going to talk about a variety of questions. She'll answer various questions that you have, and she'll let you know the entire process, what YCombinator exactly is, and I'll head over to her so that she can start the session.
Hi, everyone. It's thank you for joining me here on a Sunday morning. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So you won't see me, but you'll see my slides first. And then once I'm done talking a little bit about YCombinator and giving a little bit of advice on how best to pitch your startup if you're interested in applying or pitching investors, I'll come back and then just answer any questions that you might have about YCombinator. Okay, so I will share my screen and then 1 second. And I'll start there. So can you guys all see this slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, how many of you, really quickly, let me go back to seeing you all. How many of you really quickly are familiar with how YC works? Okay, great. So this will be a good primer. So I will go over, I'm one of the partners at YCombinator, and at YCombinator, that means all of the partners recruit great founders, we read applications, we interview the companies, we invest in them, and we help the companies as they grow. A little bit about YC. Since 2005, we funded about 1,500 startups and nonprofits. And YCombinator was founded because we believe that if you're a smart, hardworking person, you can make a much bigger impact starting your own company versus joining someone else's. So twice a year, we invest a small amount of money in a large number of companies. So the standard deal is about 120K seed funding for about 7% of equity. We have 2 batches, January through March. So we're in the middle of the winter batch right now, and then June through August. So in the current winter batch, we funded about 150 startups, and about 30% of them are international. So they come from countries outside the US. And we have quite a few from India, actually, this batch. And so we're a community of about 3,500 founders, including some of our alumni who you might have heard of. We have Dropbox, who's, Airbnb, we have Reddit, Razorpay, which is actually an alumni of yours as well, Cruise, which is a self-driving car company, Coinbase, for those of you who are familiar with the crypto space. So we have quite a few big alumni, and I think now they are valued at over 85 billion in total. So at YC, we don't provide room and board or office space. But what we do provide is this framework for focus. We at YC believe you really should only be doing, 2 things while you're in the program. And that's, one is building product, and the second is talking to users. So, founders often say that it is the most productive time in their company's life, because all they had to do was those 2 things. So at YC, what really happens, we try to put as much of what we teach online for free. We do a lot of essays, blog posts. We run a free online school called Startup School, where I think it's something like 20,000 companies from around the world participated. And it's just, free online 10-week program. But during the actual YC program, a lot of it is one-on-one office hours. So you spend a lot of one-on-one time with our partners. And the group partners sort of sit down with each company, and there are people who've built and scaled their own companies, so they have a lot of great experience. And so they essentially sit down with you and they figure out what is the one metric that you want to track week over week. So usually for most companies, we try to help them grow either users or revenue. And then every 2 weeks, you meet with a group of startups in group office hours. So you meet with your group partners and you meet with a group of 5 or 6 other companies. And I think this is actually a helpful sort of practice that you can do anywhere in the world with groups of startups. It helps keep you honest about your numbers. And what they talk about is, what have they accomplished in the past 2 weeks? What do they hope to accomplish in the next 2 weeks? And what are their major bottlenecks, or, what are their major challenges? And, sometimes, that's one of my partners, Paul Buchheit, who's the creator of Gmail. And so, a lot of times the partners who've seen thousands of companies go through the program give really great, feedback. But often some of the best advice also comes from the other people in your batch who are building and scaling their own companies. So now that the batches are so big, now that there are 150 companies going through a batch, there's inevitably an expert in pretty much any topic, from biotech to SEO. And so say you're having SEO issues, inevitably there will be someone in your batch who's an expert who can help you. So at YC, when people ask me what works so well, why has this network become so powerful, I really think it's because of the alumni. We've built a lot of software on the back end that helps connect the alumni. So the alumni are, only one click away from from each other. And we've built this forum. We call it Bookface. It's sort of like Facebook meets LinkedIn, meets Google, meets Quora. And, founders every day are on that forum asking each other for help, for introductions. They're asking questions. And as many of you know who are building startups, it's such a hard and lonely process that it really helps having a network around you of smart people who are also building, who can help you and help each other as they grow. So every week, we have weekly dinners at YC where everyone comes together to hear off-the-record dinner speakers. So these are the founders of Airbnb, and they tell their story and from the very beginning. And I think the best thing that you hear from these founders when the talks are off the record is that you learn that no matter how big and how successful they are today, every startup at the beginning is a shit show. They're all a mess. And so I think that's really comforting for startups in the early stages to hear that, no matter how successful they are, every startup has had problems. Every co-founders, every team has fought before. Companies, so many of the billion-dollar companies today, almost died multiple times before they hit product market fit. Yeah. So, yes.
Actually, I believe that your screen has frozen, so we are not yet able to see the presentation that you're presenting.
Let's see. Let's try this again. Is this here? Let's see if maybe if I just do entire screen, and I can just show like a. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, maybe I'll just do.
You can just present that as well.
Okay, I'll just keep it like that. Is that good? Okay. So essentially, we work with the companies for 3 months straight, doing office hours, and all they're doing is coding and talking to users up until demo day. So at demo day, about 450 of the world's biggest investors will come in person. And now we have about 4,000 people that watch online, investors from all over the world. And our companies only have 2 minutes to present. And so what we do with them in the 10 days leading up to demo day is we sit down with every single company and we help them figure out what the backbone or the vertebrae of the presentation will look like. So we, basically we try to figure out what 3 points about your company should we use to create a presentation that lodges itself into investors' heads. How do you build something that's memorable? When you only have 2 minutes, you have to be really quick and really simple. And so what I'll go over next is some of the advice that we give, not in terms of building that whole presentation, but in terms of just describing your company in one sentence. Because sometimes you just have to hook people in that one sentence and make it memorable enough for, anyone, the thousands of investors to remember you. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my background, a little bit of the advice we give about describing your company, and then I'll just open it up to questions. So a little bit about my background. I started at Wired magazine, and while I was at Wired, Reddit was acquired by our parent company. So I got to know the founders of Reddit really well. And so, the founder of Reddit, Alexis Ohanian, asked me to join his fund and nonprofit. And, Reddit was in the very first batch of YC. And they were the first acquisition to come out of YCombinator. And so I got to learn a lot about startup investing and community building from Alexis. And then, I joined YC as the first director of outreach, which meant recruiting and talking to a lot of potential founders, especially internationally. And then I became a full-time partner, and now I help a lot of companies prepare for their launch. So I help them prepare for pitching their companies to investors and to press. So a little bit about the advice we give around pitching your company, and this should help if any of you are considering applying to YCombinator. In Silicon Valley, I'm sure a lot of you know, everyone is obsessed with this number. 1 billion. How do you make $1 billion? How do you hit 1 billion users? But in the beginning, no one cares. No one cares about your company except your mom. And that's my mom. So at YC, we more often than not focus on this number. We focus on 100. How do you get your first 100 customers? How do you make your first 100 customers love you? So Paul Buchheit, one of my partners, likes to say, you should focus on building a company that 100 people love, versus something that just 1,000 people kind of like. Because if 100 people love you, they'll become your viral sales force. They talk about you, they spread the word about you, and then at that point, that you have something sticky. So I'll talk about 2 things: how to get clarity of vision around pitching your company, and then the real key, the real secret to building something that people want. So first, clarity of vision. So clarity of vision, we believe that people who have thought deeply about an idea, people who have thought deeply about something, can describe it very simply. They can basically, if you've thought deeply in an idea, you can explain it clearly and succinctly. You use less words, and you can explain complex concepts in a way that even a 5-year-old can understand. And that's good, because a clear idea is the foundation for growth. So, a lot of people spend a lot of money acquiring users on Facebook, paying, marketing and ad dollars. But if you have a viral product, that's $0. And describing your company in a clear and succinct way is really important, because you're going to need to do that for the entire length of your company's life. And you'll need to come up with that short pitch in order to convince co-founders to work with you, investors, users, employees, shareholders. When people are sitting around at a dinner table, you want them talking about your company. So for example, if you think about some of the products that you use every day that are on the home screen of your smartphone, you probably heard about many of those products from your friends or family. Like I remember hearing about Facebook from my friends in college, or Snapchat from friends. And so let's talk a little bit about how to build that pitch so that other people can become your viral sales force. So first, we tell people to lead with what, not with why. And that might be counterintuitive because, when you're telling a story and pitching a company, you often want to tell the story chronologically. You want to explain how you came up with the problem, why it's such a big problem, and how you, essentially, and why you're so passionate about solving it. But the problem is, if you've already made it 30 seconds into your pitch and I don't know what your company does, you've lost me. So for example, people will say something like this: my mother was a small business owner and I saw her spending 30 plus hours per week managing employee timesheets with pen and paper. So this is describing the problem first, but you haven't yet described what your company is. So don't start out with the story like this. You should start out saying what we do first. Say, we are automating payroll processing, and this is why we're doing it. The second problem a lot of startups have is meaningless jargon. So meaningless jargon, this is a tweet from one of my former partners, Gary, who's also a YC alum. He said, meaningless jargon is the #1 issue I spend time trying to fight when helping startups. So here, for example, is an actual company's description. They say, IndieCloud is a know-how synergy platform. So don't say stuff like this. It has zero informational content about what this company does. What you want to do is, when you look at someone and describe your company, they should know in their heads what they would have to build to replicate your company. So a know-how synergy platform could be anything. It could be an ed tech company. It could be Slack. It could be a messaging platform. So you have no idea what this thing even is. So don't use jargon. Be very specific and descriptive. The other thing that people do is that they just ramble. If you use too many words, people have already zoned out. So this is the actual description of the company that Airbnb used when they applied to YCombinator. We built the first online marketplace that lets travelers book rooms with locals instead of hotels. So this is a great short description. It's succinct. They use no jargon. They talk about what they're building and who they're building it for. It's simple, which I like. Here's another one that I really liked from a recent batch of YC. Towler is the Fitbit for dairy cows. So this is a simple description, and you don't have to go into deep detail in the first sentence about how it works. You just want to say something compelling enough that makes people ask follow-up questions. So when I read this in the YC application, I had so many questions. I wanted to know everything from how big of a market is this? Like, why do dairy cows need Fitbit? Like, what data are they tracking? I was so compelled that we asked them in for an interview and then funded them. And I think this is a great short description. Another one that sort of fits a similar construction is another YC company called Wright Electric. They call themselves the Boeing for electric airplanes. They build electric airplanes. And so a lot of people ask me like, oh, should I describe my company by saying we are the Uber for X or the Airbnb for X? So that construction has been a little bit cliched. I bet you are all tired of hearing companies described like that. And a lot of investors are as well. But sometimes if it paints the picture really clearly in someone's head of what you're building, sometimes that's the best shortcut to use. And in order to use that shortcut, X should be a household name. It should be clear why Y would want X, and Y should be a huge market. So don't say something like this. This is a YC company from the last batch that described themselves as Buffer for Snapchat, but not everyone knows what Buffer is. So this is a really hard one. In this case, you're much better off just describing the product directly. And so to recap, we love it when people describe their companies in a way that is descriptive, it's conversational with no jargon, and no long-winded preamble. And of course, the thing that we work with companies the most closely on during their time at YC is the real secret to building something that will go viral. And that's YC's motto, which is make something people want. And the way that we do this with companies is we figure out, like, how do you know that you're making something that people want? And that's, you build the product, you put it out in the world, and you talk to users. You talk to as many users as you can. You go up to them in coffee shops. You go up to them at your school. You ask professors. You ask them for as much feedback as possible, and then you continue to iterate. And so that's the whole process, of building something people want. So to recap, it's, we believe that having a really clear idea is the best foundation for growth. And it truly helps you to get to making something people want. And so that was my really quick rundown of what happens at YC, and quick advice on how to pitch your company if you're thinking about applying to YC, or even if you're generally just pitching investors. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about Y Combinator, the application process, startups in general, anything that you want to know.
Okay, so basically, Kat, we just want to discuss a bit about Indian startups. And
yes.
I assume that nearly 40% of the startups that are accelerated at YC are international. So what do you think are the things that we mostly miss out and we should be improving on so as to get a good ground of going ahead in this particular field?
So is the question, what can Indian startups do, to stand out and to, excel as they're applying to YC? Is that the specific question?
Yeah, basically, I just want to know, how can they improve on the grounds? Like, you must have seen various applications from Indian startups, and they must have certain shortcomings. So how can they improve on that? And what are the major ones that you could identify?
Oh, okay. So we have funded a lot of very successful Indian companies. And I would say that the one thing that we would definitely love, and there's just so much talent in India. So I'm frankly, I think it's the country that sends us the most applications after the US. So that's a really, promising, for us to see. I would say one of the things that we want to understand, is when we look at Indian companies, we want to understand, sometimes I think, there's a little bit of education that needs to be done about the market, right? So we have folks on our team that are very familiar with Indian market, but if you're building something solely focused on Indian market, explaining to us how big of a problem and how big of a market that you're facing is important to include in the application, because then, it kind of gives anyone reading your application some context about the particular problems that you're solving. And I think it's important that, we'd love to know how we can be particularly helpful to you. I think we've seen that we can help a lot of Indian companies scale, even from the US. I think sometimes with international companies, not necessarily just Indian companies, but with international companies, sometimes they don't pitch the big idea. So they pitch the smaller idea of, here's what I'm working on today, but there's no clear sense of how does this become $1 billion company? How does this become, what is the path for this? What will the world look like when a 100 or 100,000 or 1 million or even 1 billion people are using your product? And so I would say, to be sure to not only pitch what you're doing today, but what is that big vision? What do you have that can make this huge and something that is VC backable? Okay.
And I would like to ask you, how tedious is selection of companies in mainstream categories like e-commerce? So you already have an acceptance rate of nearly 1 or 2%. So what is your particular metric that helps you get to the company, which is already competing with a lot of others in the game?
Oh, I see. Okay. So if you are building a company that's in a crowded space, what metrics are we looking for? So we fund a lot of companies that are in crowded spaces and that are sometimes tackling, even similar problems as some of our alumni. And so what we're looking for there is a couple things. We really focus on the team. Like, we really like to see smart teams that are well balanced, that can both build the product and can sell the product and can show us that they're a team that can execute. We also, because we see so many applications, I think we're seeing like 15,000 a year, we like to learn new things. And so if you're approaching a problem differently than from what we've seen in the past, or you've talked to a lot of potential users and you have new insights that you can share with us, we get really excited because we've seen so many applications in pretty much every space that when founders are thinking about something in a new way or approaching them in a new way, it's really compelling. We also, if you have launched, what we're really looking for is also not just users, not the total number of users, but we look at how quickly you're growing. So are you growing, say, 7 to 10% weekly? And then if you are growing, we also look at what your retention rates are. So we look at, how much are your users coming back? Are they repurchasing? Have you built something that people actually want? But we fund things at such a wide range, from everything from idea stage to, one of our companies had $20 million in revenue, in annual revenue by the time they started YC. So it's a really wide range, but we really focus on the founders, on whether they're thinking differently about how they're approaching the idea. And then if you've launched, we look at, is there proof that people want what you're building? And, is your retention good? Are you starting to grow?
Okay. And like, going ahead on the same topic, like, what do you think are the bottleneck issues that are responsible for the rejection of a particular company?
Oh, yeah. So I think the most common thing is, sometimes the teams, we're not convinced that the teams can actually build what it is they're trying to, pitch. So that's why we really like to see teams that have a mix of both technical ability, technical talent, because I think that's the hardest thing. If you don't have a technical team, it's really hard to scale as quickly as other companies. I think the other one is they've been working on something for a very, very long time. So they say, oh, we've been working on this for years, but they haven't made any progress. So we really look at, if you've been working on something for 2 years and it's just, an e-commerce company, or we want to understand what you spent those 2 years doing. Of course, if you have a hard tech company, or a bio company, or something with long time horizons, we understand those take a really long time to develop. But we kind of look at how much time you've been spending working on this, and what has held you back from launching if it's been a while. So I would say, it's, we want to see those technical teams. We want to see the ability to move quickly. And those are probably, two of the things that we see kill the most applications.
Okay. So what are the values and what are the sort of traits that you see in a prospective founder? So if there's a person who has applied, what values do you think that the person would imbibe to his company, and what are you looking for exactly?
Great. So one of them is persistence. One of the things I worry about is a lot of people apply to YC once, and if they get rejected, they don't apply again. But the truth is, these days, about 50% of the companies that we fund have applied more than once, or the founders have applied more than once. And I have a partner who was even, when he went through YC, he applied 4 times before he got in. And so I think showing that, even if you get rejected, even if you've had some challenges, that you will keep building the company and keep applying, I think is one important trait. I think we love to see well-balanced teams, and even that we do fund solo founders. About 10% of the batch are solo founders who are building companies, but we've just seen that it's so hard to build a successful company with one person that having a team of 2 or 3 makes it infinitely easier. So having a team of 2 or 3 with at least one person that can build the technical piece of your company, that's a huge benefit, a huge positive. One is, are they decent communicators? Can they talk about what they're building? Have they thought deeply about it? Can they pitch it clearly and succinctly in a way that we can understand? Do they have a good understanding of the market? Like if, are you domain experts? Like if you've had years of experience working, we look at, did you work in that category? How did you come across the problem? If you're just out of school, we look at, what sort of projects did you do while you were in school? Why are you passionate about this particular problem? We look at, we also look at equity. We try to fund companies that have as close to equal equity split as possible. And that's because one of the things we see kill the most early stage companies is co-founder disputes. It's co-founders fighting. And if you have closer to equal equity, there's a better chance that, the founders will be on the same page and working together, for the long run. So the things we try to figure out are the co-founders a good team of people that will work together for years? And then we also try to figure out, are the co-founders so passionate about this space that they'll work on this for 10 to 20 years? Because now the average age or the average time it takes to exit or get acquired is about 10 years. So we have to believe you're in this for the long haul. And so that's, I guess those are the main pieces. I mean, there's been a really wide range of founders who apply now that get in. So their traits beyond that, I think, are pretty diverse.
Okay. And in the diversity of applications that you get at YC, what do you think? How do the first timers fare against the industry seasoned founders of new companies?
Wait, was the question about like demographics? Like what is the background or how many years of experience?
Suppose like a person is being in the corporate industry for like 10 years and is polished in this particular field. So what sort of response do you get from a person who is seasoned in a particular area than a person who has just come out of his educational career and has taken foot into the entrepreneurship circle?
So these days, the average age of applicants to Y Combinator is about 28 to 30. So that's the average age of people apply, and our acceptance numbers sort of reflect those same numbers. So the average age of YC founders is about 28 to 30 these days. But that said, we've funded everyone from a 14-year-old to someone in their 70s. So if you are very young and you're just coming out of school, we look at, what projects you've done. Usually it's school projects, class projects, side projects. We look at why are you interested in this space? What makes you interested in building this particular or solving this particular problem? Do we believe you can execute? And then if you have 10 years of industry experience and you're coming to us with a lot of experience in a field, we look more at your professional background. We look at whether it sort of matches the space that you want to build a company in. We look for that a product founder fit. And we look for new insights. So a lot of times when people have a couple years working in an industry, they have special insights about that industry and can start sort of tackling them in a very insightful way. So we kind of look for those insights. But yeah, we've funded great founders who were still in school, and we've also funded great founders who had 10, 20 years of experience. So it's a pretty wide range, and I think there are probably pros and cons to both situations.
Okay, and a few people are interested in knowing, like there is a hype about bitcoins, cryptocurrency, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So in those sort of arenas, what sort of companies have you backed, and what sort of interest does YC take in the areas that are booming?
Yeah, I think in this batch there are about 5. So the most famous crypto-related company that we've funded is Coinbase, and that was we funded that back in 2012. We have about 5 crypto-related companies in this batch. There's one called QuantStamp. There's it's sort of, there are companies that are trying to make cryptocurrencies more accessible and coming up with what are useful applications of the blockchain. We've seen a lot of things in fintech. Essentially, cross-border transfer of money. We've seen a good number of things. We're a little bit skeptical. There's a lot of scammy ICOs out there, and we always tell people that before you invest in anything crypto-related, before you put money into an ICO, you need to do your own diligence, and you need to understand how the underlying technology works. But I think we all do believe that there will be some really interesting companies and projects emerge from this space. And so I think, that's something that we are cautiously optimistic about. And then, of course, there's been so many, every company, not every, but a lot of companies these days say they're AI companies or have machine learning, but not all of them actually do. So we have a lot of, folks on our team who are AI experts who read through the application and really press into the founders and ask, how does this work? What are you, what tools are you using here? And, I think that's a really important space. And if you're interested in any particular categories, we just put out a post about our RFS, which is our request for startups. And we fund, most of the companies that we funded that have been great were ideas that surprised us. But every year there are also some ideas that we're really interested in funding, and we'd love to see more founders come to us with. And so, there's always the, AI and VR, but we also recently added, brick and mortar 2.0. So how are people using space more efficiently in order to compete with Amazon? We're looking for interesting voice applications. And so you can just look at ycombinator.com/RFS to see the whole list of startups we're interested in seeing more of.
Okay, so do you have any sort of final advice for the people out there? So they are the budding entrepreneurs. So what sort of advice would you give them?
Yes, so I would say if you are applying to YC, send in your application and be as succinct as possible. Just run your application by your friends, your family members, and say, do you actually understand what I'm doing here and how big of a problem we're solving? And so just being as succinct as possible, and understanding also that we love founders who are so passionate about their space that they're going to continue building no matter what. And so getting across that amount of passion, I think is great. And I would say that if you're sort of building your product now, and if you're in the process of building, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of founders make is they spend too much time just building and coding. They don't spend enough time actually talking to their potential customers. So even getting a really embarrassing first version of your product out is better than nothing. So I would say get that product into someone's hands, get them using it, and see what they actually have to say, because I think that's the most valuable advice that you can get versus just theoretical and asking someone theoretically whether they would use your company and product. So I would say get out the first MVP version as fast as possible, and don't just sit on it until it's perfect, because I think that's the biggest mistake. You don't want to spend 6 months of your life building something that no one actually wants. And so I would say if you need people to try it out, there's always something like Product Hunt or Hacker News. You can get feedback from really smart people around the world who are willing to try out early stage products. So I would recommend you use people around you. You're surrounded by very many smart people, but also people online who are willing to give you advice.
Okay, so now we are open to questions from the audience. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. So does anyone have one?
How does YCombinator look at non-tech startups?
Okay, so the question is, how does YCombinator look at non-tech startups?
Sorry, is the question, how does YCombinator compare to Techstars?
No. I am saying, how does YCombinator look at startups that are not tech-oriented?
That are not tech. Got it. So in the past couple years, we funded more non-tech forward companies. So we generally do fund things that have a technology or a software component. But we funded quite a few companies in the consumer packaged goods space. And so, we've seen, success, we have a lot of feminine care products. beauty and healthcare. So we're positive on them if we understand that it's a large market that you're tackling. If you have experience in this space and want to build something, but it does help even as a non-tech startup to have a tech component. And so for example, a lot of the consumer packaged goods products that we've funded have like an e-commerce component to them. So I definitely would still apply, but I think you'd have to show like why what you're building is going to be huge and why what you're building is better than what's currently on the market.
So we have the next question. Okay, so the question is, do you have any sort of programs or schemes so that you can collaborate with incubators outside the US?
We don't. I think, through Startup School, it's our free online program. I think there are a number of incubators around the world that sort of use that as their as the content that they teach. But we don't have anything, in a sort of, full capacity for doing partnerships with external incubators.
Any other question?
Many times startups are live with the problem related to local problem. But let's say I do a startup related to Indian problem. Could you help me out, even if it's not a problem for your country? How can you help me?
Would you mind getting closer to reading it?
Yeah, so basically he's asking that suppose a particular startup is based on solving a particular problem in another country which is specific or a local region, but it has the potential to scale to a good level. So how can YCombinator support it, and how does it look at that particular company while it is applying for the program at YC?
So just to make sure I have this right. You are a startup focused on a specific market. Say you're a startup focused on the Indian market, but you're looking to expand to other markets, correct?
No. So like it's a scalable idea, but that can be done in the Indian market itself. So as YC, which is based in the US, how would you look at that particular problem, and how would you review the application, and what sort of help can you give?
Oh yeah, we've funded quite a few companies that are focused solely on the Indian market. Razorpay is probably one of the more successful examples. ClearTax, and it's scalable ideas focused solely on India. And I think it's you guys are lucky because India is such a large market. You on your own, you're not Estonia. For example, Estonian companies that are building for the Estonian market have like a very small market to work with. Luckily, I think we understand that your market is so exciting because it's growing in a lot of ways. It's already large. I think there's so much opportunity that I think we see the opportunity being there, where you have to potentially explain why a little bit more about the market, about like why your particular solution is going to be the one that wins. But I think we're very, bullish on startups that are building for India. And I think, there's going to be so many really big ones that are just focused on the Indian market alone. And I think long-term, sure, a lot of the companies that we fund who are focused on the Indian market will also be able to expand to other countries. But I think that being the beachhead is good enough.
Okay, so here we wrap up the question and answer session. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that there are many applications from this particular batch to YC this year.
And if anyone has any questions that I didn't get to, you can always email me. I'm just KAT, K-A-T, at YCombinator. And so you are welcome to send me any questions about YC or the application process in general.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.